Hi, I'm Dorothy. Are you ready to dive deep into one of the bougiest zip codes in the country? The good, the bad, the ups and downs, the real and the not so real. This is That Greenwich Life. But first, a word from this episode's sponsor.
Ready to elevate your travel experience? Discover Jonathan's Travels, your source for luxury vacations of a lifetime. We have planned thousands of trips crafting the most unforgettable experiences of our clients' dreams, whether it's a bucket list safari, an epic adventure country hopping around Europe, a Disney World vacation with VIP perks, or exploring the cultures of Asia. Named one of the world's top agencies by the Robb Report, Travel + Leisure, and Condé Nast Traveler, we're more than a travel agency. We're your travel partner to create vacations beyond your imagination. Jonathan's Travels, where your journey becomes a masterpiece.
Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of That Greenwich Life. I am your host, Dorothy Cascerceri Simone. If you have been following me on Instagram, at Dorothy on TV, That Greenwich Life has officially its very own merch shop. I just bought myself a hat, That Greenwich Life hat, and figured this would be cute to wear around. And then a lot of people loved it and wanted to wear it. So I bought more hats. And I started giving out hats. And then more people loved the hats and wanted the hats. And then people started asking me for sweatshirts. And people started asking me for coffee mugs and things like that. If you go to my Instagram, at Dorothy on TV, you go to my link tree, you can see the link directly to the merch shop. And there's so many fun things there. And we're adding new things like every day. Like right now, there's travel coffee mugs and sweatshirts and t-shirts. And there's even a cute little baby onesie that says Born to Live, That Greenwich Life. And I'm going to be adding a lot more things. So stay tuned, because so far we've had a lot of purchases. And of course, if you do buy something, please take a picture of yourself in it and tag me, and I will share that on my Instagram. But anyway, so guys, I have to talk on this episode today about something that has been really heavy on my mind and a point of reflection for me that I think is worth sharing, because I think it could really connect with a lot of you listening or watching. By the way, you can watch episodes of That Greenwich Life on my YouTube channel, and you can also listen, of course, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and iHeartRadio and Audible and everywhere where you get your podcasts. But anyway, I celebrated a birthday a couple weeks back, and man, so much was going on around this particular time. And it really brought up a lot of thoughts for me about when you are in a very, very hard, lonely, confusing, dark place, and how easy it is to feel like you are never going to leave that place. I know that for some of you listening, this is something you can relate to currently in your life, or perhaps it's something that you've experienced in the past. And I hate to say this, but it probably is something that you will experience at some time in the future, because we're all human, which means that we're all going to suffer in some way, shape, or form. And, you know, That Greenwich Life, I always say it is about Greenwich, Connecticut, but Greenwich is certainly the setting of the show. It's a character in the show, but it's about like more pressing things, more like deeper things that we're all going through and that we can all relate to. So I was celebrating this birthday. This was, not like a big one, but 43, whatever. I'm not really at that point where I'm embarrassed about my age just yet, but it was a really kind of hectic time in perfect That Greenwich Life fashion. I always say like living That Greenwich Life is all about the like really exciting stuff and then like the really kind of mundane stuff. And I had just come off a 2.5 week vacation. This has always been my dream. I'm a travel writer. It's always been my dream to travel for most of August. And so we started in Avalon, New Jersey, where my family has a house, and we then my son and I flew to Mallorca, Spain, which was, oh my gosh, so unbelievable. It was just like such an incredible 4 days. We went with one of my best friends and with her son, who is one of my son's closest friends. And they grew up together, and we've been through so much together. And it was interesting being there because we definitely had to pivot our plans a lot, which goes to another episode that I recorded a few weeks back about how plan B does not always, mean that it's like lesser. Sometimes B stands for better or better than you expected. Most times it stands for that. And that's certainly a lesson that we put into play during this trip to Mallorca, because we hit some insane, like historic bad weather there, and we had to move everything around. And luckily my friend and I were very aligned, and we were both able to kind of keep in mind a lot of those same thoughts that I shared in that episode. And I think that was episode 11. That was the one that my son was a co-host on, which was super cute. But anyway, so it came off of the Mallorca trip, then went right into a trip with my family, my husband, my daughter, who's 18 months, my son, who's 8, to Niagara Falls, which is unbelievable. I will definitely talk about that in another trip. And then went straight to the Hamptons. How Greenwich of me, right? But the Hamptons is actually where my husband's parents call home. And so we went out to Amagansett, and it was for my mother-in-law's 70th birthday. So I talk about this, and I mention this because this is kind of like birthday time, with my birthday just around the corner and her 70th. And again, these lessons that kind of I've talked about here on That Greenwich Life really have came into play throughout this vacation, because she was supposed to have this like big lavish party at this restaurant in Amagansett, and these people were really disorganized, and they handled things really improperly and unprofessionally. And even though my mother-in-law and father-in-law had kind of locked everything up, in the end, the venue kind of was not doing what they needed them to do. And they gave them like 3 days notice. So then, they were like, all like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? Like, we have all these people coming. It's this great party. It's for my 70th. And then they had to go through the whole process of finding a new plan. And they ended up finding this like incredible caterer, Smokin' Wolf Barbecue out in the Hamptons, like, which is, oh my gosh, like if you ever need a caterer, this is who you want to use. And then this like amazing like person that did the cake, Lizzie Bakes Cakes, I think it's called, which is another like incredible thing. Anyway, had the party at the house, at the newly renovated house. It was so special, so magical, even better than they thought. And my son and I were talking about, in fact, I was talking to every single person at the party about this, about episode 11, where we talked about how plan B can stand for better. And this was 100% a reminder of that. And, so anyway, jumping forward, with my birthday, just a few weeks back, it brought up a lot of, I don't know, it just like brought up a lot of like thoughts and a lot of emotions. I don't know if anybody gets like really nostalgic around their birthday. I think less so these days. I do, more so in the past. I feel like I never had a birthday where I wasn't crying for some reason, whether it was tears of happiness or, the fact that I was like super depressed or really anxious or whatever it might be. These days, I'm a little bit more low key about my birthday, but it got me thinking that, like when you're in a rough place, you really never know. You never know like how long you're going to be there, even though it feels like an eternity. And when we had my mother-in-law's 70th birthday, it made me think about her 65th birthday, which was 5 years prior. We all went to Sicily, and we stayed in this like ridiculous Kardashian house in Taormina. And I think there were like 20 of us, and it was a very generous and amazing vacation that my mother-in-law and father-in-law, put together for everyone to celebrate her birthday. And nobody loves Italy more than me. Nobody loves Italy more than me. It is like a joke in my house that if I say we should go to Italy one more time, like the men in my house, my husband and my son, are going to scream. Although my recent trip to Mallorca, Spain, I don't know, I might be a convert now. I might be all about Mallorca and all about Spain. But anyway, being on this vacation 5 years ago, and then being in the backyard in the Hamptons for my mother-in-law's 70th 5 years later, it really showed me this stark contrast between where I was 5 years ago and where I was and where I am now. And I talk about this Sicily trip with the utmost affection, but I also talk about it with a ton of cringe, because I was a shell of myself on this vacation. This was August of 2019. And in March of that year, so only 5 months prior, I went into my anatomy scan after finding out that I was pregnant with another boy and telling my son, and my son being very excited about it, and our whole family being very excited about it. And I went into my anatomy scan after all the tests were positive and came back and everything looked great. And I'm going to keep saying this, but I went into my anatomy scan and then I found out the absolute worst possible thing that I could about my son and about the health of my baby. And in typical Dorothy fashion, I was like, oh, well, like, it's nothing that can't be fixed. And, I'm sure we can figure this out. And, I will talk in more detail about what those 24, 48, 72 hours looked like for me and for my family. But let me just tell you, it was the most horrific, devastating time of my entire life. And I have had a great life, but I have also been through very hard things in my life. I've had a very complicated family situation for all of my life. And so I'm not a stranger to difficult things, but this was by far the absolute worst. And when it happened and when I lost the baby, when we had to say goodbye to this baby, because we did not have a choice, it was a really devastating moment for me and for my family. And then there was this like Italy trip happening, a few months later. And the months leading up to it, I kept saying to my husband, like, I want to go to Italy more than anything, but I'm not in a good place. Like, I'm really depressed. I mean, I was extremely depressed. You probably wouldn't know because my old coping mechanism was like being really like happy and upbeat and outgoing and doing a million things and going to 1,000 parties. And, that summer, like we traveled a ton and went to like my friend's house in Aspen and like flew back on her private jet, like how very Greenwich of us. And we went to my friend's house in Nantucket, also living that Greenwich life. And we rented a house in Rhode Island and we like took all of these like insane vacations. And in hindsight, remember what I said, it was 2019. So I'm so glad that I did take all those vacations because as we know, March of 2020, COVID March was just around the corner. So I was glad that I did travel when I could. And I'm sure that I'm forgetting some of those vacations, but it was like a very manic way of handling something that was really, really heavy, really, really hard, and really behind the scenes debilitating. But before I continue, we're going to take a quick ad break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. Like I was saying, and so I was trying to get pregnant that summer because, again, in like typical old Dorothy fashion, like, if something happens and doesn't go as planned, we got to just do everything possible to fix it, no matter the cost. Like, okay, like I'm not pregnant anymore. Now I have to get pregnant. And so, this is a much longer conversation for another episode, but what I want to talk about is this reflection on the celebration in Italy, because I was not in a good place. I was in a terrible headspace. I was extremely depressed. I was being treated for PTSD. I was doing tons of EMDR therapy, which is, again, another thing that I have on my episode list that we need to talk about, we need to address. But anyway, it was a bad time. It was a really bad time. And, my husband was like, well, you don't have to go, but, we're going to go. And, my son at the time was only 3.5. No, he was 3.5 years old. And like turning 4 in a couple months. And my husband's like, and Nicholas is going to go, it's my husband was saying like, it's my mom's 65th birthday and all these things. And at the time I didn't want my son flying across the, ocean by himself. And I was just in a bad headspace. But anyway, the bottom line is we went to Italy, and I wish I could say we went to Italy and the trip was amazing and I put it all behind me and it was like better than I thought and like all these things. And yes, there were some beautiful, beautiful moments about it. And it was a beautiful celebration for my mother-in-law. And it was a beautiful time to be together with family. But there were also some family dynamics too, of course, as there are always in everyone's family to contend with. But for me, it was really, really hard, and it was really, really dark. And I was pushing through, and I was finding the beauty, and I was finding the good. But I was drinking way too much wine to cope with all of the depression and trauma that I was dealing with. And that was making me even more depressed because, as we know, alcohol is a depressant. And so that was contributing to the issues as well. And so I tell this story because like, I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, like Sicily, it was my second time in Sicily and it was so beautiful. And we like stayed in this ridiculous villa with this infinity pool overlooking the ocean. And we did like a full day of wineries in like a private, transportation service. And we did like a full day in like Syracuse, and we did like a market tour, and like we just did all these amazingly beautiful things. They rented like a sailboat and we went out on the sailboat, and I have this like really iconic picture of me and my husband, like with our son, like looking at each other and toasting our Prosecco. I was going to say champagne. It was not champagne. Toasting our Prosecco on the sailboat. And it was like this gorgeous, gorgeous trip. But I was in a world of pain. I was in a world of trouble. I was just crying every single day that we were there. I was not in a good place. And so a few weeks back, when we celebrated my mother-in-law's 70th birthday out on her newly renovated, beautiful pool deck, overlooking her pool with the light up swan floats, with this gorgeous caterer and with this, bartender and with this beautiful flamingo cake and with the family and all this great music playing, and my sweet, sweet, sweet daughter, who is 17 months, sitting in her high chair at the end of this long table that seated probably like 30 people, listening to all of the beautiful toasts. My son, who's 8, gave the most spectacular toast. My husband even, got up and said and gave a toast, which is very rare, but he doesn't love to speak in front of people. And sitting there in that moment under the like sparkling stars in the sky and the pool lights and just all of it, like the whole scene, it just really took my breath away to think 5 years prior in Italy, of all places, how fundamentally broken of a person I was, and how I really had high hopes that we would have a baby and be pregnant, like we would be pregnant, like, very soon. The day that we left for the Italy trip, I got my period. Sorry to be like graphic, but like, let's just talk real here for a second, because the whole point of this show is to be authentic. But I ended up getting my period. And so that threw me into like a deep depression, of course, because I was hoping like, oh, maybe this would be the month that I would be pregnant, which is looking back, like, oh my goodness, like how lost was this girl? Like I look at an old version of me and I'm just like, how lost were you? You truly like wanted to just put like slap a quick Band-Aid on something that was a much, much larger, much, much deeper issue and pain. And I had that happening. And then my son, I think we thought maybe he had an ear infection. So I rushed him over to the doctor in the morning before we left for Italy. And on the way back from the doctor, we passed by this big CVS here in town in Greenwich, and the doctor's office where we had gone for that 20-week anatomy scan, where my son was present. Really, he was watching Daniel Tiger most of the time, but he was present for it, where we had received this horrific news. And I don't know what it was. I don't know what about this had happened, but he's in the back seat and I don't know if he saw the building. I still to this day will never know what triggered this, but he's in the back seat, like 3.5 years old, turning 4 in like 3 months, 2 months. And he's in the back seat and he's crying and he's kicking the seat and he's saying like, what, like, I want to see my angel baby. Like, I want to see my angel. When do we get to have another baby? And I'm like, oh my God, guys, I'm like getting really lightheaded right now. I'm getting really lightheaded telling the story. And he's just like, he's just like sitting in the back seat. This was not the purpose of this episode, but he's just sitting in the back seat, like crying. And it was such a rough moment and such a rough rough day. And then the car was coming in only 2 hours to pick us up, to take us to the airport, to whisk us off on this dream family vacation to Sicily with my in-laws and my husband's family, who I love. But I was not well. Okay. So anyway, Tyler, my producer, is bringing a tissue box over. Thank you. This is not how I thought this episode was going to go, but I won't edit it out. Even though, Tyler, I hope that you're hearing me say this, even though I send you an email and say, let's edit this all out, on second thought, I want you, Tyler, to promise me that we're not going to edit this out, because we have to keep it, because we have to stay like authentic, and we have to remain true to ourselves and to what our journey is and has been. And I hope that everybody who's listening, remains true to yourself and to whatever journey you've been on. But anyway, I was sitting at the birthday dinner just a few weeks ago in the Hamptons, the 70th birthday. And I was thinking to myself, looking at my daughter sitting in her high chair, watching everybody in her beautiful little dress that I bought her only, a few days earlier in Niagara on the Lake, where I went with our family on this beautiful vacation, and we rented bikes for the day. If you've never been there, it's about a half hour from Niagara Falls outside of Toronto in Canada. It's so stunningly gorgeous. And I'm looking at my daughter, and I'm looking at my son, and I'm looking at my husband, and I'm looking at all these people sitting around the table who were all there in Sicily 5 years earlier, when I had zero hope. I didn't even actually know in Sicily how bad my journey was going to get. At that point, I thought I had already experienced the worst, losing my baby at 21 weeks, having to tell my son that his brother was not going to be coming home from the hospital. Having to do all of that, that was definitely as hard as it got as far as my life was concerned. But I had no idea that was the kickoff for the extra special parade of horrible shit that was about to happen in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And I am talking, of course, about COVID and the shutdown in 2020, but I'm also talking about the inability to get pregnant, the multiple rounds of IVF, 5 rounds to be total, to be honest, 5 rounds. I always say I was under anesthesia more times than Michael Jackson. And the multiple miscarriages as a result of those multiple rounds of IVF that didn't work, the shots, the drugs, the hormones, the deep, deep depression and increased depression, increased anxiety, increased PTSD. It got so much worse from that point that I was at in Italy. I just didn't know that at the time. And then, in the end, irony of all ironies, 5 years later, 4 years later, 4.5 years later, after I'd said goodbye to IVF and said goodbye to all of it, I got pregnant. And I didn't believe that I was ever going to meet that baby. I never believed it. My pregnancy was, a horrific ride. But that baby is my 18-month-old daughter, Gemma. And it's seriously unreal. But anyway, I tell the story not to find a reason to cry on a typical, whatever today's day is. It's Thursday for you listening. I don't know what day it is for me recording in the studio, but I tell the story because that night at my mother-in-law's birthday party, it really, really reminded me that when you're in a terrible place, you truly don't know. You don't know when you're going to get out of it, but there is one thing: you are going to get out of it. You are absolutely going to get out of it. And it's hard in that moment to realize that. I thought that having a baby would be the thing to bring me out of it. I thought that fixing what had been broken, losing our baby, we'll have another baby that will fix things. I thought that was going to be the thing to get me out of it. And it wasn't. It wasn't the thing to get me out of it. Even now, even having my daughter, that wasn't the thing to get me out of it. What got me out of it was suffering, was learning about grief, processing grief, was doing tremendous amount of hours and work on myself. It was really leaning into how broken I was and not trying to be something different. It was learning about control, learning about boundaries, learning about my relationship with others, my relationship with myself, addressing all sorts of things like the constant need for external validation. You could make a case if you're listening that like me having this podcast goes to show that I still need external validation to feel good about myself. I think everybody needs some external validation, but I'm going to tell you, like, all the years that I was on TV talking about celebrity news and working with brands and products and all those things, like, I needed that external validation like humans need water, like humans need air to breathe. I needed it desperately. These days, it's much, much less. And so, you know, I worked on myself a lot. I read a lot of books. I did a lot of therapy. I learned to meditate. I did acupuncture. I did so many things. I went on epic retreats, a insane grief retreat with a person by the name of Carrie Hanlon, who is like a godsend to this earth, who has her own journey and hard story to share and to tell, and who owns an amazing yoga studio in Philly called Our Yoga Home. I went on that grief retreat at the Himalayan Institute in Pennsylvania. Absolutely changed the trajectory of my healing journey. And I am 100% certain that I never would have been able to A, walk away from IVF, or B, walk away from trying to get pregnant, or C, get pregnant without Carrie Hanlon and that incredible retreat. But anyway, I could talk about this for so many more hours. This could be like a 9-part episode. And I will come back to this, but what I really, really felt the need and the calling to communicate today in this episode is that if you or someone that you love is going through a really, really dark place, and you feel like you've been absolutely buried, it's possible, it's probable that actually you've been planted, and that now is a chance to grow, and you will find your way out of that dark, dense soil. You will find your way to sunlight. It might look different than you thought it would, but you will find your way there. And being there that night at my mother-in-law's 70th birthday, 5 years later, made me realize how impermanent things are. Even the joy is impermanent. Like, you don't know what's around the next corner. The day that I woke up and I got myself ready and I got my son ready, who was 3.5 years old at the time, and I got in the car and I drove to the doctor's office for my 20-week anatomy scan. And I had already, ordered baby clothes and started thinking about a nursery, and, started like taking some of my son's things out of storage. Like, that person also didn't know that morning what was going to happen later that afternoon. And so we have to be really gentle with ourselves, and we have to be really gentle with one another in this life, because things are always changing. We're always changing, and things are always changing. So I hope that this story brought you just like a tiny bit of inspiration if you needed it today. If things are not where you want them to be, or things are just not, the way that you want them to be, or life is not going the way that you want, just know that it's not permanent. And on the flip side, if life is going great and you're in this like amazing moment and you have all these great blessings, make sure you take some time for some gratitude, because all of the happiness and all of the joy, it's also impermanent. So for your weekly work on, we have our weekly daily workout that exercises our mind, but the weekly work on here at That Greenwich Life is all about what helps your mind and what helps you stay in balance. And I think you pretty much know what it is. This week, I want you to just take like a few moments to really just be gentle with yourself. Whether you're going through something hard or whether you're going through something beautiful, be gentle with yourself, slow down, and like really just give yourself some love. And if you're going through something hard, just tell yourself, like, this is not forever. I'm not going to be here forever. And if you're going through something beautiful, tell yourself, this is not going to be here forever. I'm not going to be here forever. And take a minute to really show some gratitude and really savor that moment. So with my birthday just passing, it really is a time to reflect. I can do a whole other episode about, even more reflections about my birthday. Maybe I will. But today I felt really called to talk about all of this. So thank you so much all for tuning in. I can't believe I got that emotional. I wasn't intending on it. It's just, I guess you just don't know when you start talking how it's going to go. But anyway, thank you all for listening. Thank you for all of your support. And please, if you feel so inclined, go on Apple Podcasts, leave a review, leave some stars, preferably 5. And I also want to thank Pod Populi Studios here in Greenwich for helping me with this podcast and bringing it to life. I'm so grateful to them. And also to this episode's sponsor, Jonathan's Travels. Jonathan Alder is just like an incredible, incredible guy, and his company is amazing if you're thinking about planning any travel, no matter how large or how small. And remember, check out the merch store and don't just live your life, love it. Follow me on Instagram at DorothyOnTV and my website, www.DorothyOnTV.com. And I will see you all here next Thursday. Thank you again for tuning in.